Today's story takes us back once again to Whitesburg, Kentucky, as I have been making some videos about Letcher County. As I stated in my last story, I was covering some stories about corruption within the police force and within the powers that be there in Letcher County and Harlan County. I'm going to get into all that. I'm still working on that video as more and more little pieces of it come up. But today I just wanted to talk about this story. This happened on New Year's Day, it was New Year's Eve night going into the morning of New Year's Day, 2014. A man had been out celebrating the New Year's Eve holiday, but got into an altercation that led to his stabbing death. And this took place in downtown Whitesburg, Kentucky in Letcher County. Michael Hogg, 24, of Richmond, Kentucky, who was formerly from Kings Creek, which is in Letcher County, was killed at around 2 a.m. Two Pike County men are being held. Now, I'm reading this from the Mountain Eagle. That was the day that this occurred. Michael Hogg, 24, was killed at around 2 a.m. Two Pike County men are being held in the Letcher County Jail in connection with his death and the stabbing of two other Letcher County men. Charged with murdering Hogg is James Huffman, 34, of Pikeville. Huffman is also charged with first-degree assault and second-degree assault in the stabbing and wounding of two other men, David Christopher Puckett, 23, of Jenkins, and Stacy Phillips, 23, of Thornton. Puckett was flown by helicopter to Hosta Valley Medical Center in Kingsport, Tennessee. Phillips was treated at the Whitesburg Hospital and later released. Charged with 2 counts of carrying a concealed deadly weapon and tampering with evidence was 27-year-old Patrick Smith, who was also from Pike County. Smith and Huffman were charged at around 8:30 a.m. on January the 1st, after investigators interviewed them at the Letcher County Jail. Kentucky State Police and other agencies were notified at around 2:15 a.m. that a man had been stabbed during an altercation near the entrance of the bank at Hayes Street in downtown Whitesburg. According to Kentucky State Trooper Jody Sims, 5 individuals were involved in this altercation. Hogg was pronounced dead by Letcher County Coroner Marty Baker at the Whitesburg Appalachian Regional Hospital. Smith was taken into custody after police found 2 knives in his boots, and at least one of those knives had blood on it. Smith told police the knife with the blood on it belonged to Huffman. He had visible abrasions on his hands and dried blood. Police found Hogg, Phillips, Puckett with Samantha Mullins, 23, of Wise, Virginia, in the parking lot of the Letcher County Rec Center. Now, Samantha Mullins had called 911. She had tried to take these 3 men, Hogg, Phillips, and Puckett, to the Whitesburg Hospital. But as soon as she got into her Jeep and started to drive toward the hospital, which is a very short distance from where this took place, a couple of minutes away, her tires all went out, and she discovered that all 4 of her tires on her Jeep had been slashed. So she stops, she calls 911, and waits there for the police to come. Huffman and Smith were apprehended in the Recreation Center parking lot. It's unclear how they got there. Now, were they following this woman in her Jeep? They knew her tires were going to go flat because someone had slashed her tires. And so how did they know to go to this rec center? that these people had all been to a bar. It's a bar and grill in downtown Whitesburg called Street Side. Now, this was dated January the 8th. A 24-year-old Whitesburg man was killed in the early morning hours of New Year's Day. He was knifed down on the ground by one suspect. Now, it says that one of the men held him while the other man stabbed him 8 times. Patrick Smith, 27, of the Greasy Creek area of Pike County, held and pinned down Michael Shane Hogg to the ground, while 34-year-old James Huffman, also of Pike County, stabbed Hogg to death. Hogg, who was a graduate of Letcher County Central High School, was home on winter break from the Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond. He suffered 6 stab wounds to the back, 1 to his chest, and 1 in his neck. Officials say he was pronounced dead upon arrival at the Whitesburg ARH Hospital at around 2 a.m. The incident occurred around 2 a.m. The first 911 call, or maybe the only 911 call, I'm not really sure, was made by this Samantha Mullins. 911 at 2:13 after she attempted to drive them all to the hospital and found that her tires had all been slashed. Smith, who was a Marine veteran, served in the Middle East. He is charged with complicity to murder in an arrest warrant signed by Letcher County District Judge Kevin Mullins. In an affidavit accompanying the warrant, Kentucky State Police said Smith was actively fighting with the victim, Michael Hogg, and that Smith held Hogg down on the ground while Huffman intentionally stabbed him to death. This information was obtained by eyewitnesses and upon review of the evidence. Smith originally told police that one of the 2 knives concealed in his boots belonged to Huffman and that it was the knife that was used to stab Michael Hogg to death. The 2 men had been celebrating the New Year. These were the 2 other men who were stabbed, David Puckett and Stacy Phillips. They had been celebrating the New Year with Hogg in a Whitesburg restaurant and bar. Before I move on into all the talk about the trial and all of that, I want to go back and I want to tell about the way this evening started out. So now this is from the Mountain Eagle once again, and this is an account that was taken from the testimony from James Huffman during the murder trial. The night of December 31st, 2013, going into January 1st, 2014, was bone-chilling cold. The temperature had not gotten out of the 30s all day. Michael Hogg, Stacy Phillips, and Chris Puckett had plans to stay indoors, but instead, the 3 friends went to meet up at the apartment of Morgan Wilson and pick her up. Samantha Mullins and a couple of others, and they all agreed to go to the Street Side Bar and Grill to ring in the New Year with friends. The roads were dry that night, and it was a good night to be out to celebrate the New Year. By all accounts, the night was a night to remember, with good friends and good music. The ball dropped at midnight, and as soon as the midnight celebration was over, the group agreed to leave. But before daybreak, Hogg would be dead, and Puckett was in a level 1 trauma center at Holston Valley with treatment for a knife wound more than 3 inches deep in his back. Phillips had more than a dozen stitches in his hand. 2 Pike County men, James Huffman and Patrick Smith, were in jail, accused of the stabbing of the men. They also cut all 4 tires on Hogg's Jeep Grand Cherokee, as Mullins tried desperately to put the Jeep into reverse and get away with her friends. The night began about 9 p.m. when Hogg was home for Christmas break from EKU University, picked up Phillips in his father's 2000 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and rode into Whitesburg. They stopped and bought a 30-pack of Busch light beer and a fifth of Fireball cinnamon whiskey. Phillips said Hogg wanted the whiskey, but he also chipped in some money to help buy it. About the same time, Puckett was preparing to leave Jenkins. They were to meet up with friends Mark White and Spencer Fields. They were to be the designated drivers that night so that none of the men would go home drunk or get arrested. But Kelsey had to work, so his sister Samantha agreed to take the men to the bar and drive them back home. It was almost 10:30 by the time the carloads of friends arrived in downtown Whitesburg. The men wanted to go to Streetside, but Mullins, Wilson, and Tia Taylor wanted to see if there was anyone across the street at another bar called Summit City. Another band was playing there, and the place was really crowded, but there wasn't anyone the young women knew, so they went back across the street to Streetside. So Patrick Smith and another man named Matthew Blackburn were following this band that was to play that night. And while James Huffman was only an acquaintance of Blackburn, he was good friends with Smith, so they all met up to go listen to this band that night. This is how those three men came to be in Whitesburg that night. It was about 12:30 that night when the group of friends decided to leave and go back to the apartment where they all planned to spend the night. Mullins and Wilson went back to where they had parked behind Summit City because she said in a statement to police the men had been drinking and she didn't think they should be walking down the street. So she was going to go and get the car, bring it back up to the front of Streetside and pick these men up. She got into the driver's seat of Hogg's Jeep, and this is when Wilson got into the back seat. She was unable to back up because a crowd of people leaving the bars were crowding behind her vehicle. Her foot accidentally slipped and she revved the gas pedal. Mullins said when she accidentally revved the engine, Smith came to the car window and knocked and asked if she was okay, if she had been drinking, and if she was okay to drive. Mullins told him she hadn't had anything to drink. She said Huffman peered through the back window and went to the other side and got into the back seat of the Jeep. Mullins said both men were extremely drunk and she tried to get them out of the car. Huffman, she said, was groping Wilson and saying sexual things to her in the back seat, and she had begun to cry. While Mullins tried to tell them that was her little sister and saying she's way too young for you to be doing that. She was trying to get all of the men out of the car. Blackburn was knocking on the windows and telling them to come on, he had to go home. She said they were nice but drunk, and that he apologized for the way that Huffman was acting. Smith and Huffman finally got out of the Jeep, but when they did, Blackburn testified that Huffman showed him a bottle of Fireball whiskey and said that the girls had gave it to him. These men got into this Jeep with these girls, this Samantha Mullins and her little sister, and she was trying to get them to get out of the car and let them back up, let them go pick up their friends. And they were drunk and they were bothering them, and then the men started to argue and fight, and they took the bottle of whiskey that had belonged to Hogg and the other man and took it with them. She said they finally got out of the car and she locked the doors, but Huffman continued to stand beside the Jeep, telling her that he needed her to take him back to Pike County. Mullins said she refused and that she was finally able to back out of the parking spot and drive away. She said Huffman climbed onto the back bumper and rode it all the way back up the street to Streetside. Once again, he tried to get into the vehicle. She said he stopped when he saw Hogg, Phillips, and Puckett come out of the bar and get into the Jeep. This was at 1:23 a.m. Mullins said she didn't say anything about what had happened to the men because she didn't want there to be any argument, so she just wanted to get on out of there and everybody to go back home. But when they started to look for the whiskey, they asked where the whiskey was, and this is when she finally told them what had happened. According to Phillips and Puckett, they were at the apartment for about 20 minutes, and they went out to search the Jeep for the fireball, and they searched the Jeep to see if anything else was missing. Mullins drove the three back to the bar and dropped them off, then drove back around and parked in a parking spot. It was 1:45 a.m. Video footage shows the Jeep coming up Main Street and stopping outside camera range. Then Hogg walks into frame across the patio where people were talking and milling around. And they walked around the bar looking for these men, trying to find out where their bottle of alcohol was. They returned and began talking on the patio. Now, this was out in the front of the bar. Huffman was gesturing wildly as he spoke. Smith came out of the bar and also walked out of frame. And Smith comes back into the picture and is seen walking down the street behind the others. That is the end of the video footage that is available. Testimony is that after this, the five walked up the alley and the conversation seemed friendly. They were waiting for Blackburn to come back with the bottle of whiskey. At one point, Mullins said in her statement that Hogg walked up to the Jeep and asked if she was sure that they were the same men that had gotten into the car. And she said yes, this was the same group of men that had been at the Jeep. This is when things took a turn. Phillips said Huffman went to the corner and charged at Chris. Puckett said he knew he had been punched in the face and felt pain and something running down his back. Hogg yelled that Huffman had a knife, and Puckett realized he had been stabbed. Phillips and Puckett testified that Hogg couldn't walk on his own. They had him down, they were stabbing him, they said that they were trying to get these men off of them, and that people were just, it was chaos, everybody was just fighting, but that Smith was holding Hogg down on the ground. Once they were able to get him away from the men, they said that he couldn't walk on his own, and that they were able to get him into the Jeep. So they were able to get Hogg into the Jeep, and Mullins said in her statement that she locked the doors, but she was having trouble getting the Jeep into reverse. The two men, Huffman and Smith, were beating on the windows, attempting to break out the windows. Once we were backed up and started down the hill, they were beating on the windows, Puckett said. I turned around to see if they were chasing us, and they were. They were running down the street behind the Jeep. Samantha was screaming, "Oh my God," and I looked over the seat. Mike was holding his neck, and there was blood everywhere. It was just coming out everywhere. The Jeep got as far as the Letcher County Rec Center, and Mullins pulled in and tried to hide the Jeep and called 911. When police arrived, Hogg was not breathing and had no pulse. He was pronounced dead at the Whitesburg Hospital. Named Justin Hunsaker. And now he was a Whitesburg City police officer, and he had been one of the first responders. When the 911 call came at 2:15 a.m., he arrived, and he and another city official were still out there at 4 a.m. gathering information, gathering evidence. Now, this Hunsaker had been at the rec center parking lot, and Smith and Huffman came up to him and asked him, "Can we use your phone? We need to call someone to come and give us a ride home." Now, they came up to this police officer. They asked to use his phone, saying that they needed a ride. Smith was also charged with criminal mischief after it was determined that he had cut the tires on Mullins's Jeep. Huffman is charged with first-degree murder, first-degree assault, second-degree assault. Both suspects entered innocent pleas at arraignment in Letcher District Court, and both were being held without bond. Sources knowledgeable with the investigation told the Mountain Eagle that a couple believed to be the parents of either Huffman or Smith were driving around in Whitesburg looking for the two men shortly before they were arrested. The man and woman were stopped after being observed in a van with a Pike County license plate. They told a police officer that they were looking for their son, who had called and asked them to come to Whitesburg to pick them up. They said that they were lost and they were walking around looking for a ride home. The officer who stopped the man and woman let them go after being notified that Huffman and Smith had already been picked up by Officer Hunsaker. Streetside Bar and Grill owner said a surveillance video shows no altercations took place between the victims or the suspects that night at the bar or immediately outside on the street in front of the bar. In December, James Huffman of Pikeville was convicted of criminal complicity to commit murder, and he is serving life in prison. Patrick Smith made a plea deal, and this plea deal was accepted, and he was given 20 years on 8 charges, including criminal facilitation and attempt to commit murder. Now, the defense argued that Huffman was acting in self-defense when he pulled out this knife and began to stab these men. He testified that the men were assaulting him and that he was trying to fight for his life. Huffman said that he deserves a shot at redemption. Now, they also cited that drug addiction was partially to blame for Huffman's behavior. Now, his lawyer, Steve Owens, said during the trial that for the jury to convict Huffman to life in prison would prevent him from being able to seek redemption. Well, I don't think that that's true. I think that you can seek redemption within the prison walls, and many people do. But you're also being held accountable for your actions. I'm sorry. A man apologizes to the victim's family during sentencing in a 2014 murder trial. Patrick Smith, the second defendant charged in connection with this murder, and he was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. It was an emotional day in the courtroom. Every stab wound is felt every minute of the day, said the mother of Michael Hogg. During his statement, Smith looked at the family and said, "I'm sorry." He was also charged with an additional 5 years for felony criminal mischief because of the damage that he had done to Hogg's car. So now, Patrick Smith made a plea deal, and this plea deal calls for him to spend 20 years in jail. Now, all the eyewitnesses said that the person who actually did the stabbing was James Huffman. According to court documents, Huffman had a history of charges in Pike County. The most recent charge against him prior to this happening was in relation to an incident that occurred in early December, where he allegedly engaged in a 1-hour-long standoff with police after Pike County Sheriff's deputies attempted to serve a search warrant on him for drug possession. Huffman pleaded not guilty to charges of first-degree criminal trespassing, disorderly conduct, menacing, and harassment. And he was due in court on those charges in January. He was also charged in January of 2011 on a charge of fourth-degree assault stemming from a domestic dispute. In that case, it was said that Huffman was found forcing his wife onto a couch as she tried to leave their home. He was sentenced to 1 year for that, but that was diverted, and the case was eventually dismissed after he met the requirements of his diversion. So he had a history of some problems, and I don't know about Patrick Smith. I didn't see anything about him on there having prior problems with the police, but Patrick Smith eventually took a plea deal, and he was given 20 years for this plea deal. Now, Huffman, I don't even know if he was offered a plea deal, but he didn't get a plea deal. He didn't take a plea deal. He maintained his innocence. He pled not guilty to these charges, and he maintained that he was the innocent victim, that he was scared to death, he said, and he was running for his life before this altercation in this parking lot. It's unusual for people charged with murder to take the stand in their own defense, but he took the stand and he told the jury that he had started drinking that evening with his father at dinner. He said that he drank a lot, and he was really drunk when his friends Patrick Smith and Matt Blackburn showed up at his house that evening to take him to Whitesburg. They wanted to go watch a band that was performing at Summit City. He drank so much, he testified, that the night was a blur. He didn't know where they parked. He didn't know how they got to Summit City. He didn't remember listening to the band. He remembered some yelling, and he remembered Smith and Blackburn getting into a disagreement and yelling at each other, but he couldn't remember if they had actually got into a fight. However, his memory seemed to clear up when it came to the murder, and he remembered that these Stacy Phillips and Hogg and Puckett had confronted him about this bottle of whiskey. He started threatening me and cussing me really loud. It scared me, he said. He was a really big man. He shoved me and called me a liar. He said a lot of really bad things to me. And he said that his friend Patrick Smith left him there all alone, surrounded by these three men. I plead with them, he said. I began to plead with them for my life. I think I was going to get my butt kicked outside. Video of the scene outside the bar shows Huffman and the three stabbing victims walk out onto the patio, and all of the men had their hands in their pockets. Puckett and Phillips stopped and talked for a minute, and some of the other people around were standing around on the sidewalk. At that point, Huffman walks out of the bottom of the frame, and the other men walk out of the video frame. Now, the people that was with Hogg, the other two men that were stabbed, testified that Huffman and Smith began to follow them down the street toward their car. So if he was running for his life, I think he probably would have been going in the other direction. But he claims that these three men pursued him down the street, and that once they got behind the bar, he says that Hogg ripped his shirt open and threw it on the ground, and that's when Huffman says he pulled his knife, trying to scare them away. Huffman's defense has been fixated on Hogg's shirt during the trial, attempting to prove that a blue flannel shirt found by the trash can about 40 yards away was Hogg's. Witness statements from the day of the murder and testimony said that Hogg was wearing a black shirt with a gray Carhartt flannel shirt, and that he was not wearing a blue plaid shirt. Huffman further testified that he was kicked in the head and knocked out. He said that he lost his knife, and when he came to, the stabbing had already occurred, and that he didn't know who had done the stabbing. He said he didn't know where Patrick Smith was at the time that this took place. The only time I remember Patrick was after I got knocked out and the Jeep was going down the hill and he had my knife in his hand, Huffman said. He said that he called his parents to come and get him. That's all I wanted that night, was to go home, he said. Huffman closed his testimony by saying that he was sorry for everything that happened. I'm sorry that you all lost a son, and I'm sorry that my parents have lost me. There's no winner out there, he said, sobbing loudly. Banks asked Huffman if he was so intoxicated he was able to run from Hogg without falling. Huffman repeatedly asked what Banks was talking about. The prosecutor again played a video showing him walking down the sidewalk. He said that he was walking straight and that he didn't really even appear to be stumbling any. He said that he was very athletic and that he was very graceful. Now this goes back to when his parents were in Whitesburg looking for James Huffman that night. The prosecutor was asking the question, if you were so intoxicated that night that you didn't remember going there, you don't remember the events that happened, and so on, how were you able to make a phone call to your mother to come and find you in Whitesburg and give you a ride home? And so this was, a line of questioning that they were trying to prove that James Huffman was not being truthful about how intoxicated he was. Life sentence handed down in Letcher murder trial. Nearly 4 years after the stabbing death of Michael Hogg on New Year's Day 2014, a jury has convicted James Huffman in Hogg's death. In the 15th day of his trial, Huffman was found guilty on all charges. James Huffman found none from the jury. He found no leniency from the jury. He was sentenced to life in prison for Hogg's murder. He was also sentenced to 20 years for the attempted murder of Christopher Puckett and 10 years for the attempted murder of Stacy Phillips. 10 years for the attempted murder of Samantha Mullins. Now, what I was able to find was that Patrick Smith had asked to be granted parole. I think this was in 2019, and he wasn't given this parole hearing. He was turned down for the hearing, and it was deferred for 2 more years. I looked everywhere online trying to find out if he had been granted parole. I could not find him in the Kentucky Prisoner website at all, so I'm guessing that he probably was. If anyone knows that, they can comment. I haven't been able to find it. As far as James Huffman, he's still in jail. He's still in prison, serving a life sentence, but he is eligible for a parole hearing in 2033. It's just a very sad thing. Too much alcohol, and some people might argue that the 3 men should not have gone back to the bar to confront them over a bottle of whiskey. It's just awful that this young man lost his life and these other 2 men had to be witness to that. And this young woman who, volunteered to drive them that night had to be a witness to that. And thanks for watching.